Hey, it's so good to be here with you, 2911, both, yeah? It's good to be in person and be online. We were streaming, I got to be in the streaming room last weekend and worship with a bunch of you online as well, and so it's just so good throughout this season that we are still the church, and it looks different, right? And it looks different in some challenging ways, but there are also some fun ways that it looks a little different. Has anybody been trying some new recipes out there? Okay, I'm really worried about what you're eating during this time. I'm just saying. I tried a few new things. I won't share them with you today. But also sometimes there are like some creative things that you do to keep safe, right? And so I wear a mask. I usually wear a mask to the grocery store and things like that. And so I have a couple options. And my mom actually taught me how to sew when I was a kid. And she still has leftover material from some shorts that I sewed, yeah? And so she made me a mask. She's amazing, by the way. These 7-year-old Karl walking around in some awesome Bermuda shorts. That's what we called them back then. And but that's great. But at the same time, I was trying to be a little bit more conservative at the grocery store. And so I put it on. I didn't look, and what I didn't realize that was when I wore it this way, it makes me look like I have gills. So there's, yeah, anyways. So thank you, but wear the mask the right way. But also, I found a few other people that have props to them because they've been creative, right? Like, get yourself some water bottles, make some stuff, okay? Like, also Nutella, scented masks, and this last one's my favorite. Props to Scuba Steve because, like, yeah. Anyways, this is just amazing what people come up with, but that person is not getting sick whatsoever. They brought their own oxygen to the store. Like, they're good. They're all right. But also, like, throughout this process and this season, there's a lot of change and a lot of different things happening. And so one of the things you heard Pastor Mark talk about was just in the midst of this, we've decided to merge our campuses, and part of that involves moving. So we got to load up a U-Haul truck when all was said and done after we had met with everybody and just been able to connect with people. And so we loaded up a U-Haul truck and we're ready to move over here. And so the day we're driving over here, just a couple Fridays ago, I was driving the U-Haul truck. Nobody was in there, and I was just like, God, would you help us to have some fun unloading because it is hot. And like it is just like, and it hit this last week too, right? But it was getting hot, and I'm just like, God, would you just help us to have some fun? And so I get into the parking lot, and I'm coming down the aisle towards the offices, and I'm thinking, hey, I probably don't want to like have to back up a ton. I should go over one aisle to see if maybe I can like back it in a little bit easier and just be lined up with the office doors. And I'm just thinking this out, right? So I take a sharp right. And all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, I don't remember there being a curb here. Like, I don't remember any curbs under our overhangs. And so I'm just sitting there and I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm on the curb. I'm driving a truck. It's better than my little Camry. So I'm just like, I'm gonna pop this curb. We're good. I'm just gonna gun it. We're gonna go forward. So I gun this U-Haul, and I'm like, here we go. And like I move a foot, and that thing is stuck. And I'm not moving anywhere. So I'm like, and then I remember, yeah, there's no curbs under this thing that I'm under. And I realized that I should probably get out of this truck because I'm stuck right now. And I'm not sure what else to do. And by the way, Pastor Mark's car is like sitting right underneath the same overhang. And I'm like, I'm not sure if the overhang's that safe anymore. So I should look. So I got out of the truck. The overhang's fine. The U-Haul truck, not so much. So it's yeah. You could actually, there was a skylight in the U-Haul now, and so we're good. But also, when I got back to the U-Haul, I've moved a lot in my life, and like I should have a punch card for U-Haul, but I've never bought the insurance for U-Haul. I just put on my own insurance. This was the one time I paid the $38. Yeah, worth it. But one of the U-Haul workers walked around the counter and said, hey, I hate to burst your bubble, but it doesn't cover the top of the truck. It's like, oh, man. So I'm thinking it back through. I'm like, I researched this. This is the one time I bought it, and if I'm going to pay $38, you know I'm reading the details online on the U-Haul site. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure it covered it. Anyway, so we had a good laugh, and I leave. And I call him back, and it takes me like 5 days to figure out that it is covered, we're good, it's all right. Yeah, and I actually even have some, I have a memento from this. It's good. It's sharp, so be careful. I'm going to set that down there before I hurt myself. Don't let your kids play by the speaker. It's just good. But I've had some time to think about this, and finally I got a hold of the manager, and he said, we're all good. It's okay. Yes, it's covered. We're okay. And so it's okay, but needless to say, I've had some time to chew on this story about the U-Haul a little bit. And sometimes God uses, it was a fun move, by the way. That prayer was answered. It's not the way I had thought it would be. But sometimes God speaks to us through some really unique situations in our lives, and I think this was one of them, especially as I chewed on it for the last couple days after it. And I realized that our culture and our world is stuck too. I'm stuck. We're stuck in a lot of different ways during this season. And sometimes we need to get out of the place, out of the truck that we're stuck in, and take a look at where you're stuck so that you can move forward. Because just ramming forward doesn't get you anywhere a lot of the time. Like, you get stuck worse than you were. And God's inviting us to take a step out of the truck and see just maybe what he's doing in this season rather than what the world is bringing our way. See, we're stuck for a lot of different reasons. Everything from our health crisis right now with the pandemic, with COVID-19, to being stuck in a financial crisis as well on some level, whether you are working and you're more busy than ever, or you're not working and you're wondering where your next paycheck is going to be, or you've got your side hustle and that's become your main hustle and you're not sure how that's going to all work out. We're stuck, but on top of that, in our nation, we are facing the reality of the racial divide that still exists in our nation that should have never existed and has existed much longer. So here we are, we're stuck in our world. And I'm so glad that God's word speaks to us right where we're at, especially when we're stuck. And this guy Joseph that we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks, he's been stuck in prison, and we've heard that. And I want to encourage you, if you miss those messages, jump on our app and listen to those. They're just so important, I think, for where we're going as a church and what I believe God wants to do in your life. So jump into those. But we're still with Joseph this weekend, and he's still stuck. Joseph had been in prison for years and years. In fact, when he got sold into slavery, he was most likely a teenager, but now he's 30 years old. The story Pastor Mark shared last week was 2 years earlier, and Joseph's still stuck in prison because some guys that he interpreted dreams for forgot about him and forgot to tell Pharaoh about him. And so here's Joseph still in prison, and there's Pharaoh who's leading the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh goes to bed one night, and he has a crazy dream about some cows and some grain. And like, anybody have some crazy dreams in here? Like just some weird, crazy stuff happening in your dreams, and you're like, I don't want to tell anybody about those dreams. But back then in the Egyptian land, they actually really held dreams as a really important thing. And so they actually had people that we would compare today to be scientists. They were experts on dream interpretation, and we've got ancient books and things written in Egypt about this stuff, and it was a study that they would do back then. And so Pharaoh wakes up and he turns to the experts and he says, hey, will you tell me what my dream was all about? In fact, I had two, and he shares the dreams, and they're like, hey, we don't know anything about your dreams. Like, we can't help with this one. I can just imagine Pharaoh being like, wait, what do I pay you for? Like, I don't get this. Like, okay, you're supposed to be the experts. But then this cupbearer speaks up and he says, hey, I forgot about something. I failed. Like, I had this moment for the last 2 years. I forgot to tell you something. I was totally supposed to tell you. And he starts to share about this friend that he met in prison. This is the cupbearer whose dream Joseph had interpreted 2 years earlier. And the cupbearer says, there was a young Hebrew man with us in the prison who was a slave of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he told us what each of our dreams meant. And everything happened just as he predicted. I was restored to my position as cupbearer and the chief baker, while he was executed and impaled on a pole. This is that moment. Like, if you're nervous and you're sharing something and you kind of overshare, Like, this is that moment that maybe the cupbearer should have thought, like, oh, I failed. I'm now sharing about the guy who was executed. Maybe I shouldn't include that. Like, okay, but he keeps talking. He shares the whole thing. And so the cupbearer shares this with Pharaoh, and Pharaoh thinks, like, okay, none of my experts are any good to me right now. And my cupbearer, well, I mean, I've known him for a while. I rehired him after he was in prison. Like, okay, I'm going to trust this cupbearer because he's the only option I've got right now. And so Pharaoh sends for Joseph. Joseph gets cleaned up, and he comes and stands in front of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh is getting his hopes up. He's ready to share this dream. So he says to Joseph, essentially said in verse 15, I had a dream last night, and no one here can tell me what it means. I can imagine him like looking over his scientists of the day. But I've heard that when you hear about a dream, you can interpret it. It is beyond my power to do this, Joseph replied. Now, if you're the cupbearer at this moment, like you're thinking, oh shoot, like, I mean, how bad were those cupcakes? Anyways, but this is what Joseph says next. But God can tell you what it means and set you at ease. But God can tell you what it means and set you at ease. Joseph understands that Pharaoh is clearly not at ease at this point, that he is anywhere but peaceful. He says, I can't do it, but God can. And I think one of the biggest things I want us to walk away from this morning is that Joseph admitted that he didn't have what it took, but he admits that he needs God in the midst of this situation. Joseph admitted that he needed God. And he says, but God can tell you what it is and put you at ease. Joseph knew that this dream, this thing, that even this opportunity wasn't about him. He couldn't do this on his own. And instead, Joseph, who as a young kid bragged to his brothers about how he was going to lead people, Joseph says, hey, I can't do this. Joseph, who was a good leader, who led in Potiphar's house, who even seems to have led in the prison, Joseph says, I can't do this. But God can. And God can put you at ease. And God used this opportunity that Joseph was simply willing to admit. Joseph admitted, I can't do this, but God can. I can't do this on my own, but God can. He invites God into the situation. And a lot of the time when we have an opportunity and a moment or a platform of success, a lot of the time, what do? We talk about ourselves. We talk about how great we are rather than how great our God is. So I wonder what it would look like for us is in our moments of success when we get unstuck from this season, what it might look like instead of being proud and prideful of ourselves, to walk into those moments with humility, like Joseph did, to walk into it. And so the story continues, and Pharaoh starts to tell Joseph what the dream is. He's like, okay, if you can't do it, but God can, all right, then I'm going to share this dream. And Pharaoh says in verse 17, in my dream, he said, I was standing on the bank of the Nile River, and I saw 7 fat, healthy cows come up out of the river and begin grazing in the marsh grass. And this is where it gets weird. But then I saw 7 sick-looking cows, scrawny and thin, coming after them. Not that part, but this next one part, or in a minute. I've never seen such sorry-looking animals in all of Egypt. These thin, scrawny cows ate the 7 fat cows. That's where it's weird, right? Just kind of but afterward you wouldn't have known it, for they were still thin and as scrawny as before. And then I woke up. Anybody have some weird dreams? Yeah? Like I dreamed once that my room was crowded with slugs all over, and like I thought I woke up, so I woke up and ran into my parents' room. Like it was last week, but that's not, it's weird. Anyways, they live in Illinois. It was when I was 7, I promise. But Pharaoh had this crazy dream, and sometimes we read the Bible and we miss things that are like kind of like in interesting details. Like, can you just imagine, not too graphically, but just imagine a little bit with me, like, here's a Kobe beef cow. I imagine, I didn't do research on that part. But here's a Kobe beef cow. It's a big cow. It's ready, and there's 7 of them, and these little scrawny cows come out of the water too, and they look hungry. but like in a weird way, like cows' mouths are this big. I don't know how long that dream was and how long it took them to eat those cows, but anyways, this was a weird dream. But here's the thing is God gave Joseph what he needed in that moment. And God gave Joseph what he needed to be able to interpret this dream for Pharaoh, this guy who executes bakers and cupcake makers. And I'm going to stop rhyming because that's weird. Sorry. So Joseph speaks up and he says, this is what it means. This is what God would say to you. These are prophetic dreams. These aren't just because you ate something weird last night. This is a prophetic dream. Those first 7 cows and grains, there's another part of the dream, but he shares with them those first 7 cows, those are 7 good years. They're going to start really quickly here. And things are going to go really well. You should invest some things. You should make some investments. You should grow some extra crops and things because this is going to be a good 7 years. But then those weird cows that are really oddly hungry, that represents 7 years of famine. It's going to be so bad that people will forget the first 7 years. It's a good thing that Joseph admitted that he couldn't do it on his own, but God could. Because that's not the message I would want to deliver without God's help, right? Like, here's Pharaoh. I've never seen scrawny cows like that in all the land of Egypt, but let me tell you what this dream means. Like, that's the moment. So first Joseph admitted that he needed God's help, but then Joseph also wasn't worried about how he would be appointed. What happens next is Joseph then shares some wisdom that I think God was giving Joseph, both from God and I think from the years of leadership opportunities that Joseph had years earlier. But in verse 33, Joseph continues. He said, "Therefore Pharaoh should find an intelligent and wise man and put him in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh should appoint supervisors over the land and let them collect 1/5 of all the crops during the 7 good years. Have them gather all the food produced in the good years that are just ahead and bring it to Pharaoh's storehouses, store it away, and guard it so there will be food in the city." So God gives him an interpretation. He shares it. God gives him some wisdom. He shares it. But here's the important thing. He doesn't appoint himself into that position. First he says he admits he needs God's help, but now he's not worried about being appointed. This is, again, the same kid when he was a kid that bragged to his brothers that he would lead all of them. So much so that his brothers wanted to murder him and sold him into slavery instead. Like, this is the same guy, but God stepped into Joseph's life, I believe, years earlier and started to do some deeper work in Joseph. And what happens next in verse 38? So Pharaoh asks his officials, "Can we find anyone else like this man so obviously filled with the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh puts him in charge, only second to Pharaoh. Joseph has his run of the land. And here's the thing, when you go from prison to palace that quick, if you haven't learned some things in the prison season and you have that much power in the place of the palace, you probably will fall apart. We don't see that in Joseph's life. The stories we read after that are amazing. We're going to get to that throughout the rest of this series. I don't want to wreck that, but Joseph goes from the prison to the palace, and I think part of it was because God worked some things out in his life during those years in the prison so that he could flourish in the palace. It didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen the moment he walked into that palace. But while he was in prison, I really think his perspective, his focus changed because he was forced to get out of the truck that he was stuck in, out from underneath that beam, and look at where God had him. He was willing, rather than just sitting in that truck and ramming through, he said, "Okay, I clearly don't have this. Now, where are you at in the midst of this?" So if we'll bloom where we're planted, even in the seasons that look a lot like prison, I really believe we can flourish in palace. So what does this have to do with us? What does this have to do with us in our season of being stuck? I'm not here to say that tomorrow everything's going to be better. I'm not here to say tomorrow there will be this cure for COVID-19 or that all racism will end like that. But to figure out how God might be able to speak to us right here in this season where we are stuck, in this moment where we have nowhere else to go and we feel like there's no moving forward, to instead invite God in and say, I can't do this, but God can. God can. And so I think it starts like this. It starts with this perspective of, God, I want to honor you right here in the prison seasons of my life. Because if I can't honor you now, why would I ever expect to be able to honor you in the palaces? So let God form you right here in this season. So we're planted, if we'll let God, in this prison season, long before we ever make it to the palace. And you may never stand in a palace, but God may have you. You may open a door or an opportunity at your workplace when things open back up. Who knows that your side hustle that's now your main hustle, like who knows that God might use you in an influential way in our community and in our world to do something good, to help people, not to just make you money, but to make a difference in our world. Who knows that God might use you as maybe a future politician to create better policies and create better things for our nation to help stem and help stop the racism that so ravages our world and nation. Who knows that God might not use you someday to raise a kid. You might say, hey, I've not even met that special someone yet, but like maybe, just maybe, if you would allow God to speak into you during this season where you feel stuck, who knows that you might not raise some amazing kids someday. You might not write a policy in that position, but you can do some great things to influence our world through those kids and the future of the church and the future of the world. So here we are in the season of being stuck. As we let ourselves be planted, even in the prison, just like Joseph. Joseph laying his head down night after night, still clinging to the promise that he heard from God all those years earlier as a teenage boy, still holding on to that, but laying his head down night after night. Nothing about his life seemed great, but trusting that God would use him there in the times of the prison, but also that God would use him someday in the palace. Saying all this to myself just as much as you. I read something that just hit home this week from Christine Kane, and it was written, she just said, what you do in this season matters. What you say in this season matters. Hey, what you pray in this season matters. What you read in this season matters. What you scroll through on Instagram and what you watch on Netflix, it matters. And more importantly, what you believe matters. So are we just scrolling past the things of God, and are we instead looking for the world? Are we spending time on pages that we shouldn't, on websites that we shouldn't be looking at, and just being like, it's okay, I don't have to get up and go to work tomorrow, so I'm all right? Or are you allowing God to pour into your life in an incredible way, because what you do during this season matters? Oh, it doesn't matter. It's okay. It'll be done, and when it's done, then I can get back on it. Look at Joseph. One day he was sleeping his life away in prison. The next day he was called into the palace to interpret a dream. I believe Joseph was allowing God through all those years to give him a different perspective, to help him see something better than where he was stuck. And if we would simply allow God to do that for us. There was a girl born in 1940 prematurely, just 4.5 pounds, into a black family, and in the 1940s especially, this meant that so much about her life was going to be a struggle. On top of that, she had 22 siblings total in her family. She was the 20th of them. Her life didn't scream greatness. Years would go by, and she was sick quite often as a kid. She had scarlet fever, a number of other diseases, and eventually polio, to the point where the doctor said, hey, you're never going to walk again. Put some braces on her legs to maybe help. You're not going to walk, they said. But her mom saw something different. In the middle of that season, she spoke to her little girl and she said, "You're going to walk someday. You're going to run." And a few years went by, and this little girl, choosing to listen to her mom instead of these doctors, decided that she would take her braces off. At 9 years of age, she took her braces off and she set them down. She decided to try walking. She would stumble at first and wasn't very steady on her feet, but she continued to walk and to move forward, believing there was something more for her. And step by step, she became more steady on her feet, to the point that just 7 years later, she had been learning to run. She had not just learned to walk, but been learning to run. And 7 years later, in the 1956 Olympic Games, at the age of 16, she ran with her relay team and won a bronze medal. 4 years later, she was in the Olympic Games again, and those 4 years later, she won a number of medals that year. She broke some records as to how many medals a woman could win in the Olympic Games. This girl, Wilma Rudolph, nicknamed the Black Gazelle, the Black Pearl, she thought those things were great accomplishments, but she said her greatest accomplishment was not in the Olympic Games. It was working for peace among races. It was working for unity in her world and in her community. That maybe she wouldn't have had those opportunities had she just settled for being in the prison season of her life. I think it looks like this for us. Because you may feel stuck. And this has probably not been the only time that you felt stuck. But if we'll simply get out of the places that we're stuck and invite God into those moments, what could God do in this season that looks and feels a lot like prison? What could he do to prepare you to be used by him? Remember, it's not about us, but God can use you. What if in this room there are future politicians to write better policies for our nation, to lead the way rather than complaining about the way things might be? What if in this room there are future business leaders and owners that have a place of opportunity to lead a team and a staff that know what it's like to understand a kingdom culture? Even if they don't know Jesus, they might be able to call it out and see, I see the Spirit of God in you. Just like Pharaoh did with Joseph. What if in this room there are moms and dads that will raise amazing kids, not to just learn how to sew shorts and things like that, but will raise amazing kids to pour into future generations? What God might do with you if you would just do like Joseph did and say, I admit I can't do this on my own. Don't stop there, but say, but God can. But God can bring you peace. God can step into this situation and he can bring wholeness and healing. But you might feel like you're not born into greatness, and that's okay. Neither was Joseph, and neither was Wilma, but God can use you if you're just simply willing. If you're here in this place and maybe you've never stepped into this place of following God and accepting him as your Lord and Savior, I want to tell you today that he is the one that can bring peace into your world and into your life. And it just simply looks like saying, God, I can't do this on my own, but I believe you can. That's the first prayer we get to pray. And maybe you are a Christ follower in this room and you would say, hey, I need God to step into my situation right now. And I want to encourage you during this next part of the service just to pause and step out of the place that you feel stuck and allow God to move in. So would you stand with me as I pray? God, we realize we cannot fix the things going on in our world on our own. We realize, God, that we don't have the solution, and nor are we supposed to be the solution. But if we'd simply say, God, you can, and maybe you can use me. God, that you can do greater things than we could ever hope to ourselves. So God, we admit today that we can't do this on our own, but we believe that you can. And so would you step into our hearts and into our lives and help us to have peace from you, but also share the peace you've given us with our world. In Jesus' name.